Hello and welcome to another video of Come Fly with Lee. Today I'd like to introduce you to Golf Charlie Echo India Alpha. This is an MCO3 gyroplane, recently taken a 1/3 shared ownership in the aircraft, and in today's flight it's my first time flying a passenger in this aircraft. This is the route, a 60-mile round trip from Sleip down to Welshpool, going through Llangollen, across to Lake Bala, across to Lake Vyrnwy and into Welshpool. So now I'm getting Maddie strapped in and secure in the aircraft. This is her first ever flight in a gyroplane, so just giving her some extra reassurance. You'll see that she's wearing a high-vis jacket and I also wear one as well. Personal preference, we're operating on a principle of see and avoid, and gyroplanes aren't always the easiest of aircraft to see due to their sleek design, and so anything we can do to aid visual recognition of other aircraft is the better for flight safety reasons. So now we've got the aircraft started, we've done our warm-up checks and our power checks, and we are taxiing along runway 05 to the start of the runway. We can see that this initial part of the runway is not fit for takeoff or landing. However, we taxi forward to the threshold numbers where we can commence our takeoff sequence. So now we're approaching those runway numbers and we bring the aircraft to a stop. We do the last part of our takeoff checks, and that's turning the switch from a brake mode to flight. Now with the engine RPM increased and the pre-rotator engaged, we can start providing drive up to those rotors to get them spinning. We want to get the rotors spinning to around about 200 rotor RPM to be able to begin our takeoff sequence. So we're just in the process now of bringing those rotors up to speed. It's a gradual process. From now we've achieved our takeoff RPM and we've released the pre-rotator, we've brought the stick back and released the brakes and increased the throttle. This now provides us power and thrust to start moving forwards, and as we do so, air is going through the rotor increases in speed to the point where you saw it come into the green arc on the rotor RPM gauge, and we have achieved takeoff. Climbing out now. Normally we'd climb out around about 65 miles per hour. However, with Maddie being in the back and it's her first flight, I didn't want the climb out to be too severe, and so I accept a higher airspeed and a slightly shallower climb. Now we're starting to bring the aircraft round to the right to avoid noise sensitive areas and establish the aircraft into an 800-foot gyrocopter circuit at Sleip. So now at this point we've established climb out into the cruise, and we're flying out now to the northwest towards our first reference point, which is towards Ellesmere, and then from Ellesmere we proceed onwards towards Chirk and the Llangollen area. Now we're around about 12 nautical miles to the northwest of Sleip, and I'm just about to point out to Maddie the aqueducts which run across the river, running along the valley that we'll be flying along, routing down to Llangollen. Now since we've taken off and we've got ourselves into the cruise, we've not been flying all that much in time, and I'm conscious that it's still a relatively nervous and new experience to Maddie, and the only turns that we've been able to do so far are those within the circuit, and so conscious of the fact we've not done much turning and banking, I suggest that we do a few turns left and right to get used to it. Now we are flying midweek, and so the Royal Air Force and other military aircraft along with other civilian aircraft are active in the area, and so we're consciously aware that we might need to do some evasive turns to make sure that we keep the flight safe. The last thing I want to do is to provide a sudden turn with Maddie not having experienced much turns so far, so here we are just doing a few gentle banks to the right and to the left to get her settled in. Now bring ourselves back round to our original heading out to the west. Just to the left of us we've got a Michaelite site in the distance called Chirk. never flown into them myself, but consciously aware that it's there and making sure we have a good look out for any related traffic. Now we're flying along the valley, and the built-up area down to the left that we can see here is Llangollen, and there's a hill just out to the right where we see some people on the top of. So we take the opportunity to bring the aircraft round to give them a wave, and also to appreciate a 180-degree view back up the valley that we've just flown along. So now we're flying away from Llangollen, flying further to the west, southwest, running along the River Dee that we can just see beneath us out to the right. This track's going to lead us on, and eventually we're going to end up at Lake Bala, just taking advantage of the beautiful surrounding scenery. And so now we take advantage of the more rural setting. We drop down, accept a lower altitude, and enjoy the views from a lower height. Given the safety of the gyro, if we have an engine failure at any point, I'm very confident that we'll be able to get the aircraft into any one of these fields that are surrounding us. There'll be a left turn to put the aircraft down into wind. So now we've climbed up a bit higher, and we can just start to see the beginning part of Lake Bala that I've just pointed out, nearing the horizon. Taken a slightly higher altitude at this point due to the higher ground that we need to transit across, and also the terrain changes where we've got some trees. The extra height gives us more clearance and thinking time to deal with a potential engine failure should it happen, and also better visibility to look out for any traffic. Now we are approaching Lake Bala. We've got a beautiful view down the lake. We are approaching the most eastern side of Lake Bala at this time, routing westbound. If we were to continue along this heading, we would approach the west coast near to Barmouth. As we look along the lake, we see a number of people out on their boats, paddleboards, kayaks. The town of Bala just down to the right of us here. Continuously keeping a good lookout, and thankfully the visibility is fabulous today, as it's well known for military aircraft to transit low level in this region. I am using Sky Echo 2 on board the aircraft today for the first time, and this allows me to be able to see other aircraft ADS-B information on my screen in front of me, which is giving me navigation information, and the Sky Echo 2 is also allowing me to obtain my GPS position for navigation purposes. Other aircraft with similar technology will also be able to see me, however we can't always see everyone. Now we're doing a right turn to look back down Lake Bala. Now we make a turn to take up our heading to the south, which will start our routing towards Welshpool. Leaving the Lake Bala area now, we're transiting down to our next reference point of Lake Vyrnwy, and we're flying over higher ground at this point. Now we could fly a lot lower than this. The area is very rural and hardly anybody around. However, we need to give ourselves thinking time should we have a problem on board, and so we take a slightly higher altitude than what we otherwise could do. Just coming off at the 12 o'clock on the nose now, you can start to see the emergence of Lake Vyrnwy. And so now we've climbed the aircraft up to a higher altitude, around about 3,700 feet, and at the most southern end of Lake Vyrnwy. Bring the aircraft round to the right to look down the lake, and we can see the dam at the bottom. Now you might see an aircraft just to the right of my iPad at this point. It's just going to proceed down the right hand side of us, so we've got that aircraft visual, and we've also got him on the Sky Demon iPad. Bringing the airspeed back now, our speed across the ground is now virtually minimal, and we commence a vertical descent. You can see the rate of descent is increasing, the height is decreasing on the altimeter. However, we don't do this for too long. We bring the power back in, and the reason is we don't want to shock cool the engine, especially given the time of the year and how cold it is outside, and so we're keeping a close eye on temperature gauges. The speed's back on, and we commence a few turns around the lake. So now we continue back on our original heading to the south, routing back towards our target of Welshpool. At this point we have now established ourselves into the circuit at Welshpool. We've done an overhead join for runway 04, and you now find us flying on the base leg. Circuit height at Welshpool is higher than a standard airfield. It's at 1,500 feet above surface on the QFE. That's a pressure setting at surface elevation. Flying the base leg and about to start our final turn from base leg to the left onto final approach. Now we find ourselves a bit higher at this point, and so raise the nose, and you'll see the airspeed starts to reduce. We increase the rate of descent, allow us to re-establish the picture that we're looking for, and the nose comes back down. As we get lower towards the ground, to avoid having a prolonged taxi across the ground, we increase the power, and we do what's commonly known as a hover taxi, where we are airborne just above the ground, and then when we get to where we want to be, we bring the power back and the airspeed reduces, and because we're close to the ground, the aircraft just settles down nicely. Wheels are on the ground now, and we come to a stop. If we applied the brake straight away, we would have stopped within the matter of a metre or two. We don't, we keep rolling forwards just so we can vacate the runway. However, we've changed the switch from the flight mode to brake mode, applying pressure to the brake to start slowing the rotor down. Taxiing forwards along the runway, and then we'll vacate off to the left. Welshpool is operated via an air-to-ground radio service, so all of our transmissions are made for other pilots to be aware of what we're doing. It's not controlled, although it does have a ATZ surrounding the airfield. There's not that many hard surfaces to Welshpool to vacate. The first one is coming up now on the left hand side, which will take. You can see the air ambulance parked off just on the nose now. Just going to speak to the air-to-ground radio operator just to see where they want us to park, and they advise us just on the left hand side, so we just momentarily stop to make sure the rotors have come to a stop before we enter the apron area, and now we will taxi forwards round to the left to park where we've been advised to park. Slight downside to the MTO compared to the MTO Sport Gyroplane is the turning circle is quite a large turning circle, which you'll see later on as we depart from Welshpool. Something I'm still getting used to. And so once we've parked the aircraft in the right position, we just push it back slightly so it's more out of the way. We come to a stop here and shut the aircraft down. And we get out and go and find tea and cake. So as we get to the restaurant, we find out we've just missed the lunch serving by 15 minutes. However, they are still serving that cake. Spend about an hour on the ground, having a obligatory selfie before we depart, and then we're back in the aircraft. So by this point we've started the aircraft up, warmed it up to temperature, we've done our power check, and we are going to be departing on runway 04. The air ground operator has advised we're okay to backtrack runway 04 with a microlight having already been ahead of us waiting to take off. You'll see I've brought the aircraft to the left hand side to give us clearance from that microlight to the right, but also to allow us to get that aircraft turned through 180 degrees due to the very wide turning circle that the MTO has. The pilot of the microlight has very kindly asked if I want to go first, but I advise that it's probably best for him to do so, given the fact that we need room to turn. And so as we come round, he moves forwards, lines up on the runway and departs. No other aircraft reported or seen in the circuit other than this on microlight to depart now. As he starts rolling forward, we bring the switch round from brake into flight, which is the part of our pre-takeoff checks that we need to complete. You can see the airfield diagram on the Sky Demon helping with the familiarisation of an airfield that you're not used to. Gives us the taxi ways and further situational awareness. The microlight is now established off into a climb, and we now can start the process of that pre-rotation, just like we did at Slave on our departure. Engine RPM is increased, pre-rotator engaged, and then the rotor is brought up to 200 rotor RPM. Once we've got 200 rotor RPM, we release the pre-rotator, which we've done now. Stick comes back, brakes release, increasing the throttle, checking the temperatures and pressures, and steering the aircraft to keep us aligned on the centre line, runway 04. The nose tries to bob up, and we just fly parallel to the runway, 65 miles an hour, and straight into the climb. Maddie's already done one takeoff, and so I'm more than happy to accept the climb out at 65 miles an hour. As we climb out now, we can just see the airport hangars and the cafe down to the left hand side where there is somebody waving to us, so we give them a wave back, continue with the climb, and just to the left of the nose we can start to see the town of Welshpool. Getting rid of the airfield diagram on the Sky Demon, and that allows for further onward navigation. Now we've elected for a much shorter route back, as we are getting short on time with other things that we need to do later on in the day. So on the way back we just take advantage of gaining a bit of height and having a little look at the area of Middletown, which is quite a prominent feature that leads into the valley that goes down to Welshpool. So we see that coming just on the right hand side of the screen now. And as we look back down towards the area we've just come from, we can see with the sun starting to set out in the west that the visibility in that direction starts to decrease, so we don't spend too long flying in that direction. We come back around to the left and then we proceed en route back towards Slape. Contact Shawbury and we obtain clearance through their military aerodrome traffic zone before then speaking to Slape and landing at Slape after a couple of circuits. Thanks for joining us on the flight today. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully it won't be too long until we're up in the air again.